The city clock had just struck 7 in the evening when David Wellington stepped out of the glass tower that housed his company's headquarters. At 42 years old, he'd spent the last 15 years building a tech empire from scratch, and today had been particularly exhausting. 3 back-to-back board meetings, countless emails, and a conference call with investors in Tokyo had left him drained. David loosened his tie as he walked toward the parking garage, then paused. His sleek black sedan waited for him in its reserved spot, but something made him hesitate. The evening air felt crisp and refreshing after hours in air-conditioned conference rooms. Maybe a walk would clear his head before the long drive home to his empty mansion in the hills. He changed direction and headed toward Riverside Park, a shortcut he used to take years ago when he first started his company and couldn't afford a car. Back then, he'd walk through this park every evening dreaming about the future, planning his next move. These days, he rarely took the time to walk anywhere. The park was beautiful in autumn. Golden leaves carpeted the pathways, and the old oak trees stood like ancient guardians watching over the joggers, dog walkers, and couples strolling hand in hand. David found himself envying them. Success had brought him wealth beyond his wildest dreams, but it hadn't brought him companionship. His days blurred together in an endless cycle of meetings, deals, and lonely dinners in a house too big for one person. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the park started to empty. David picked up his pace, suddenly aware that he'd walked farther than intended. He was near the old fountain now, the one the city had restored, last year with donations from local businesses, including a generous contribution from his own company. That's when he saw her. A young woman was slumped on one of the park benches near the fountain. At first, David thought she might be sleeping, but something about her posture seemed wrong. Her head was tilted at an awkward angle, and her skin looked unusually pale even in the fading light. David glanced around. A few joggers passed by without slowing down. A man walking his dog gave the bench a wide berth and hurried on. In a city of millions, it was easy to become invisible. Easy for people to look away from problems that weren't theirs. But David couldn't look away. He approached slowly, his heart beginning to race. As he got closer, he could see she was young, probably in her mid-20s. Her clothes were clean but worn, and a small backpack sat on the ground beside her feet. Her face was covered in a thin sheen of sweat despite the cool evening air. "Miss? Are you okay?" David called out softly, not wanting to startle her if she was simply asleep. No response. He moved closer and gently touched her shoulder. Her skin felt cold and clammy. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. David's mind raced through possibilities. Was she sick? Injured? Had someone hurt her? He pulled out his phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 1. What's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm and professional. "I'm at Riverside Park near the main fountain. There's a young woman here who's unconscious. She's breathing, but her skin is cold and she won't wake up," David explained quickly. "Sir, is she showing any signs of injury? Any bleeding?" David looked carefully. No visible injuries, but she's sweating and her breathing seems wrong." "Okay, sir. I'm dispatching an ambulance to your location now. Can you check if she has a medical alert bracelet or any identification?" David carefully checked her wrists. No bracelet. He felt uncomfortable going through her belongings, but this was an emergency. He reached for the backpack and opened it carefully. Inside, he found a worn wallet with an ID card. The name read Claire Mitchell, and the address was from across the state. "Her name is Claire Mitchell," David told the operator. "She's 26 years old according to her ID." "Good. The ambulance is on its way, but I need to inform you that due to multiple emergency calls tonight, there may be a delay of approximately 40 to 45 minutes. Can you stay with her?" David's stomach dropped. 45 minutes? He looked at Claire's pale face, at the bluish tint around her lips. He'd seen that color before, years ago, when his foster brother had suffered from severe low blood sugar. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. "I don't think she has 45 minutes, David said urgently. Her lips are turning blue. "I think she might be diabetic or something. She needs help now." "Sir, I understand your concern, but you should wait for the paramedics. They'll have the proper equipment and training." David's mind was already racing ahead. Dr. Chen, his personal physician, lived only 10 minutes from his estate. The estate itself was 15 minutes away by car. That was half the time of waiting for an ambulance that might arrive even later than promised. "I'm taking her to get medical help," David announced, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Sir, I don't recommend moving her without proper medical supervision," the operator warned. "I understand, but I'm not going to watch her die while we wait. I have a doctor who can help her." David ended the call and carefully slid his arms under Claire's body. She was lighter than he expected, and that worried him even more. He could feel her bones through her thin jacket. When had she last eaten a proper meal? He lifted her gently and began walking quickly toward the parking garage. A few people stared as he passed, but no one stopped to help or question what they were seeing. David found that both disturbing and, in this moment, convenient. His car chirped as he approached, and he managed to open the back door and lay Claire across the seat. He grabbed his jacket from the front seat and tucked it around her like a blanket, then jumped into the driver's seat. The drive to his estate usually took 20 minutes, but David made it in 12, pushing the speed limit but not recklessly. Every few seconds he glanced in the rearview mirror to check on Claire. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. "Hang in there," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Just hang in there." As he drove through the familiar streets of the wealthy neighborhood where he lived, David realized the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, a millionaire businessman, racing home with an unconscious stranger in his car. His lawyers would have a heart attack if they knew. His security team would lecture him for hours about the risks. But none of that mattered right now. The iron gates of his estate swung open automatically as his car approached. The mansion loomed ahead, all glass and modern architecture, perched on the hillside with a view of the entire city below. David had bought this place 5 years ago, thinking it would feel like success. Instead, it just felt empty. He pulled up to the front entrance and immediately called Dr. Chen. "David, is everything all right?" The doctor's voice carried concern. David rarely called outside of scheduled appointments. "I need you at my house right now. It's an emergency. A young woman is unconscious. Possible hypoglycemia, shallow breathing, cold, and clammy skin." "I'll be there in 8 minutes," Dr. Chen replied without hesitation. "All business now. Get her inside and keep her warm. Check her pockets for any medication or medical information." David carefully carried Claire through his front door. His housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, appeared from the kitchen and gasped. "Mr. Wellington, what happened?" "Medical emergency. Dr. Chen is on his way. Can you prepare the guest room on the ground floor and bring some warm blankets?" Mrs. Rodriguez, who had worked for David for 3 years and had seen her share of surprises in this house, simply nodded and rushed off. David carried Claire to the living room and laid her carefully on the leather couch. He grabbed a cashmere throw from the chair and covered her, then knelt beside her, feeling utterly helpless. In his world, problems were solved with strategy, money, or connections. But here was a human being in crisis, and none of his usual tools applied. He studied her face properly for the first time. She had delicate features, dark hair that needed washing, and shadows under her eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. There was something fragile about her, but also something that suggested strength beneath the surface. Who was she? How had she ended up unconscious in the park? Mrs. Rodriguez returned with blankets and helped David make Claire more comfortable. "Should I call an ambulance?" she asked. "Dr. Chen is almost here," David replied, checking his watch. "He'll know what to do." The doorbell rang exactly 8 minutes after the phone call. Dr. Chen hurried in with his medical bag, his gray hair slightly disheveled as if he'd run to his car. "Tell me everything," he said, kneeling beside Claire and immediately checking her pulse and pupils. David explained finding her in the park, the 911 call, his decision to bring her here. Dr. Chen listened while working, pulling out a blood glucose monitor from his bag. "Smart thinking," the doctor said, pricking Claire's finger and checking the reading. His face grew serious. "Her blood sugar is dangerously low, 42 milligrams per deciliter. Normal is between 70 and 100. She's in severe hypoglycemia. He immediately prepared a glucose injection and administered it, then set up a small IV drip with a glucose solution. David watched, feeling his heart pound as he waited for some sign that Claire would be okay. "How long has she been unconscious?" Dr. Yo, Chen asked. "I don't know. Maybe an hour? Possibly more. We got to her just in time. Another hour and we might have been looking at serious brain damage or worse." David felt his knees go weak. The weight of what had almost happened, what could still happen, pressed down on him. They waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Dr. Chen monitored Claire's vital signs, adjusting the IV drip and checking her blood sugar levels again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Claire's eyelids began to flutter. "She's coming around," Dr. Chen said softly. "When she wakes up, she's going to be confused and possibly frightened. Let me do the talking first." David nodded and stepped back, suddenly aware that Claire was about to wake up in a strange mansion with no idea how she got there. How would she react? Would she be afraid? Angry? Would she think he had bad intentions? Claire's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. She blinked several times, then her gaze sharpened as she took in the high ceiling, the expensive artwork on the walls, the crystal chandelier overhead. This was definitely not the park bench where she'd last remembered sitting down. Her eyes widened in panic and she tried to sit up quickly, but Dr. Chen gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Easy now," he said in his calm, professional voice. "You're safe. My name is Dr. Chen, and you've had a medical emergency." Claire's breathing quickened as she looked from the doctor to David to Mrs. Rodriguez, then back to the unfamiliar surroundings. Her hand instinctively reached for the IV in her arm. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "What happened? Who are you people?" And with those questions, everything was about to change for both of them. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the 3 strangers surrounding her. The room spun slightly and she felt weak, but adrenaline was already flooding her system. Fight or flight. And since she could barely sit up, fighting seemed like a terrible option. Dr. Chen kept his hands visible and his voice steady. "You're experiencing hypoglycemia. That means your blood sugar dropped to dangerous levels. You were unconscious in Riverside Park when this gentleman found you and brought you here for medical treatment." Claire's eyes darted to David, who stood a respectful distance away, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his face showing genuine concern. She'd seen enough true crime documentaries to know that danger often wore a friendly face. "I want to leave," she said, her voice stronger now despite the trembling in her hands. "Right now." "I understand you're frightened," Dr. Chen replied calmly. "But I need you to listen carefully. Your blood sugar was at 42 when we tested it. That's life-threatening. You need to stay still for at least another 30 minutes while this IV replenishes your glucose levels. If you try to leave now, you could collapse again." "He's telling the truth," David said quietly, taking a small step back to give her more space. "I found you on a bench near the fountain. You weren't responding. I called 911, but they said the ambulance would take 45 minutes. You looked like you were dying, so I brought you here because my doctor lives close by." Claire studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but all she saw was worry and something else. Guilt, maybe? As if he was afraid she'd think the worst of him. "You brought a stranger to your house?" Claire asked, her voice heavy with suspicion. "I know how it looks," David admitted, "but I promise you the door isn't locked. Mrs. Rodriguez here can call you a cab whenever you want to leave. Your backpack is right there on that chair, untouched except when I looked for your ID to give to the 911 operator. Your phone is in the front pocket." Claire's eyes followed his gesture to the chair where her worn backpack sat. Seeing it gave her a small measure of comfort. She looked down at the IV in her arm, then at Dr. Chen's kind, weathered face. "How do I know you're really a doctor?" Dr. Chen smiled slightly and pulled out his wallet, showing her his medical license. "I've been practicing for 32 years. I have a clinic in the medical district downtown. You can look me up online if you'd like." The older woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, stepped forward with a warm smile. "I've worked for Mr. Wellington for 3 years. He's a good man. A bit of a workaholic and sometimes too serious, but good. He wouldn't hurt anyone." Claire wanted to believe them. The alternative was too terrifying to consider. But years of hard lessons had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming at her to be careful. "When did you last eat?" Dr. Chen asked gently, checking the IV drip. The question hit Claire like a slap. When had she last eaten? She remembered a granola bar yesterday morning. Or was that 2 days ago? Time had become fuzzy lately, each day bleeding into the next as she tried to survive. I don't remember, she whispered, and the admission made her feel ashamed. Dr. Chen's expression softened with understanding, not pity. That explains the hypoglycemia. Your body ran out of fuel. Combined with stress and possibly not drinking enough water, your system simply shut down. Claire felt tears prickling at her eyes but refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry in front of these strangers no matter how kind they seemed. Mrs. Rodriguez, David said quietly. Could you prepare something light for Claire to eat? Maybe some soup and bread? Of course, the older woman said, already heading toward what Claire assumed was the kitchen. An awkward silence settled over the room. Claire kept her eyes on the IV, watching the clear liquid drip slowly into her veins. Each drop was keeping her alive, and she hated that she needed help from anyone, especially a wealthy stranger whose motivations she couldn't understand. Why did you help me? The question came out more aggressively than Claire intended, but she needed to know. People walked past me in the park. I remember seeing them. Nobody stopped. So why did you? David moved to sit in a chair across from the couch, maintaining distance. He seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. I grew up in foster care, he said finally. My parents died when I was 8. Car accident. I bounced around between different homes until I aged out of the system at 18. Claire looked at him properly now. His suit probably cost more than she used to make in a month. His watch was definitely worth more than her old car. Nothing about him screamed foster kid who had it rough. I know what it's like to be invisible, David continued. To be someone people look past. When I was 19, I passed out at a bus stop because I hadn't eaten in 3 days. I was working 2 jobs, trying to save money for community college, and I just pushed myself too hard. A stranger took me to a diner and bought me a meal. Didn't ask questions, didn't make me feel small. Just helped me. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. I promised myself that if I ever got successful, if I ever made something of myself, I'd never walk past someone who needed help. So when I saw you on that bench, I couldn't just keep walking. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself. The honesty in his voice made something inside Claire crack. She'd been so focused on survival, on keeping her walls up, that she'd forgotten what genuine kindness looked like. I'm not homeless, she said suddenly, defensively. I mean, not really. I have a car. I've been sleeping in my car. You don't owe me any explanations, David said gently. I had an apartment, Claire continued anyway, the words spilling out. I had a job. I was a graphic designer for a small marketing firm. Good at it, too. But the company downsized and I was the newest hire, so I got cut. I couldn't pay rent. Got evicted. Everything just fell apart so fast. Dr. Chen checked her blood sugar again and nodded with satisfaction. Much better. 73 now. You're out of immediate danger. Claire felt the difference. The fog in her head was lifting and the weakness in her limbs was fading. But with clarity came the full weight of her situation. She was in a stranger's mansion, having narrowly avoided death with nowhere to go and nothing in her pockets. How long ago did you lose your apartment? David asked. 3 weeks. I've been looking for work, but it's hard when you don't have an address. Can't exactly put currently living in a 2005 Honda Civic on job applications. She tried to laugh, but it came out bitter. Mrs. Rodriguez returned with a tray carrying a bowl of chicken soup, fresh bread, and a glass of water. The smell made Claire's stomach clench with hunger so intense it was painful. Thank you, Claire whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Eat slowly, Dr. Chen advised. Your stomach isn't used to food right now. Small bites. Claire didn't need to be told twice. She took the spoon with shaking hands and brought it to her lips. The warm broth was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything on the tray. David watched her eat, and Claire could see questions forming behind his eyes. But to his credit, he stayed quiet, letting her have this moment of dignity. After a few minutes of eating, Claire felt more human than she had in weeks. Her mind was clearer, her hands steadier. With that clarity came a crushing wave of embarrassment. Here she was, being fed like a charity case in some mansion that probably had more bathrooms than her entire apartment building used to have. I should go, she said, setting down the spoon even though the bowl was only half empty. Where will you go? David asked, not challenging, just genuinely wanting to know. Back to my car. It's almost 9 at night. The temperature is supposed to drop to 40 degrees. I'll be fine. I've managed this long. You collapsed from starvation, David said, his voice firm but not unkind. That's not managing. That's barely surviving. The truth of his words stung. Claire looked down at her hands, at the calluses and the chipped nail polish she couldn't afford to replace. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice small. Why are you being nice? People don't just help for no reason. David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I want you to stay here tonight. Just one night. There's a guest room downstairs. It has its own bathroom. The door locks from the inside. In the morning, we can talk about what comes next. But right now, I want you to sleep in a real bed and wake up to a real breakfast. I don't accept charity, Claire said stubbornly, even as her body screamed at her to accept. It's not charity. Consider it medical advice, Dr. Chen interjected. You need rest and proper nutrition. Going back to your car tonight would be medically inadvisable. Claire looked at each of them, searching for the catch. There had to be a catch. I'll stay tonight, she said finally, hating how defeated she sounded. But tomorrow I'm gone. Fair enough, David said, standing up. Mrs. Rodriguez will show you to the room. There are toiletries in the bathroom, and I'm sure she can find some comfortable clothes for you to sleep in. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded warmly. Come on, dear. Let's get you settled. Dr. Chen carefully removed the IV and put a small bandage on Claire's arm. Your blood sugar is stable now, but you need to keep eating regularly. I'll leave some glucose tablets with Mrs. Rodriguez. If you feel dizzy or weak, take one immediately. Claire stood up slowly, testing her legs. They held, though she still felt shaky. She grabbed her backpack and followed Mrs. Rodriguez through the massive house, acutely aware of her dirty clothes and unwashed hair. The guest room was bigger than her old bedroom had been. The bed looked impossibly soft, covered in white linens that probably cost more than she used to spend on groceries in a month. French doors opened onto a small patio with a view of the garden. The bathroom is through there, Mrs. Rodriguez said, pointing to a door on the left. There are fresh towels, soap, shampoo, everything you need. I'll bring you some clothes in a moment. When the door closed behind the housekeeper, Claire finally let herself collapse onto the edge of the bed. She put her head in her hands and let out a shaky breath. What was she doing here? This felt like a dream or maybe a trap disguised as a rescue. She walked to the bathroom and gasped. It was all marble and glass with a shower that looked like it belonged in a spa. Claire caught sight of herself in the mirror and flinched. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, hair greasy and tangled, skin pale and drawn. No wonder David had thought she was dying. A soft knock on the door made her jump. Mrs. Rodriguez stood there with an armful of clothes. These should fit, she said kindly. They're just some comfortable things, and dear, Mr. Wellington is a good man, but I understand your caution. The room door locks from the inside. My room is just down the hall if you need anything. Don't hesitate to call out. Thank you, Claire managed. Alone again, Claire locked the door and set her backpack down. She pulled out her phone, relieved to see it still had some battery. 23%. She'd have to be careful with it. She opened the bathroom door and stared at the shower for a long moment. When was the last time she'd had a proper hot shower? The gym membership she'd used for showers had expired 2 weeks ago. Claire stripped off her dirty clothes and stepped under the hot water. The moment it hit her skin, she started crying. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the shame of the last 3 weeks came pouring out. She cried until the water ran cold, until there were no tears left. When she finally emerged, wrapped in the softest towel she'd ever felt, she found the clothes Mrs. Rodriguez had left. Sweatpants and a t-shirt, simple and clean. They fit perfectly. Claire climbed into the bed and it felt like sinking into a cloud. The sheets smelled like lavender. Her body melted into the mattress, every muscle finally able to relax. Tomorrow she'd leave. Tomorrow she'd figure out her next move. Tomorrow she'd go back to surviving on her own. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself feel safe. As sleep pulled her under, Claire's last thought was of David's words. I promised myself I'd never walk past someone who needed help. Maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world after all. Claire woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment she forgot where she was and panic seized her chest. Then the memories flooded back. The park, the mansion, David Wellington and his kind eyes. She sat up slowly. half expecting the previous night to have been some kind of fever dream. But no, she was still in the luxurious guest room, still wearing borrowed clothes, still very much in a stranger's house. Her phone showed 8:30 in the morning. She'd slept for almost 11 hours straight. When was the last time that had happened? Probably before she lost her job. The smell of coffee and something sweet drifted under the door. Claire's stomach growled in response. She should leave now, slip out before anyone woke up, avoid the awkward morning after conversation. But her body betrayed her, pulled toward that smell like a moth to flame. She found her clothes from yesterday still dirty but wearable. No way was she going to have breakfast in borrowed pajamas. That felt too intimate, too much like she belonged here. As she changed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked better than yesterday, more alive. The sleep had done her good. Claire grabbed her backpack and made her way through the quiet house. In daylight, the place was even more impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city below. Modern art hung on white walls, and everything was so clean it practically sparkled. She followed the smell to a massive kitchen where Mrs. Rodriguez stood at the stove, humming softly to herself. The older woman turned and smiled when she heard Claire's footsteps. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Claire shifted her backpack on her shoulder. "I should get going. I don't want to impose any longer." "Nonsense. Sit down and have some breakfast. I've made pancakes and there's fresh fruit and coffee. Really, I should—" "Claire." Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was gentle but firm. "Sit, eat. You can leave after breakfast if you want, but you're not walking out of here on an empty stomach. Not on my watch." There was something motherly in her tone that made Claire's throat tight. She couldn't remember the last time someone had fussed over her like this. Her own mother had disowned her 2 years ago when Claire had chosen art school over medical school. The message had been clear. Follow the family plan or you're on your own. Claire sat at the kitchen island, setting her backpack on the stool beside her like a security blanket. Mrs. Rodriguez placed a plate in front of her, stacked high with fluffy pancakes, fresh strawberries, and a drizzle of maple syrup. A steaming mug of coffee appeared next to it. "Thank you," Claire whispered, her eyes stinging. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. The pancakes were perfect, light and buttery. The coffee was rich and strong. For a few minutes, she let herself forget about everything else and just enjoyed the simple pleasure of a good meal. "Mr. Wellington is in his office," Mrs. Rodriguez said, wiping down the counter. "He asked if you'd speak with him before you leave." Claire's guard went up immediately. "About what?" "He didn't say. But don't look so worried, dear. I told you he's one of the good ones." Claire finished her breakfast in silence, trying to prepare herself for whatever was coming. Maybe David wanted her to sign something. Some legal document saying she wouldn't sue him for kidnapping or whatever. Rich people always protected themselves. After breakfast, Mrs. Rodriguez led her through the house to a set of double doors. She knocked once and pushed them open. David's office was all dark wood and leather, with one wall entirely made of bookshelves. He sat at a desk by the window, still wearing casual clothes. A laptop was open in front of him, and papers were scattered across the desk surface. He looked up when they entered and immediately stood. "Claire, good morning. Please sit down." Mrs. Rodriguez slipped out, closing the doors behind her. Claire remained standing, her backpack clutched in her hands like a shield. "I'll stand, thanks. What did you want to talk about?" David moved around the desk but kept his distance, seeming to sense her discomfort. "I wanted to check that you're feeling better, first of all." "I'm fine. Thank you for your help. I'll be going now." "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air between them. Claire hadn't thought that far ahead. Back to her car, she supposed. Back to parking lots and public restrooms and trying to make $3 last all day. "That's not really your concern," she said, more sharply than she intended. "You're right. It's not." David sat on the edge of his desk. "But I have a proposition for you if you're willing to hear it." Claire's stomach dropped. Here it was. The catch. The real reason behind all this kindness. "I'm not interested in whatever you're thinking," she said coldly. David looked confused for a moment, then his eyes widened. Oh no. "Claire, I'm not, that's not." He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely flustered. "I'm talking about a job. A real job." Claire stared at him, not trusting her ears. "A job?" "Yes, my company needs a creative director for a new project. I looked at your portfolio last night." "You what?" "Your Instagram. It's public. The graphic design work you posted is exceptional. The rebranding you did for that coffee shop, the logo designs, the marketing materials. You have a real eye for visual storytelling. Claire felt violated and flattered at the same time. He'd been looking her up, researching her, but he was also praising her work, seeing the value in what she'd created. That's all old stuff, she said defensively. Most of those projects were from a year ago. Doesn't matter. Talent like that doesn't just disappear. David pulled out a folder from his desk and handed it to her. This is what we're working on. A new app for connecting freelance creatives with clients. We have the tech side figured out, but the branding is all wrong. It looks sterile, corporate. We need someone who can make it feel authentic and approachable. Claire opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were mock-ups of an app interface, marketing materials, and a project brief. She scanned the pages, her designer's eye immediately spotting the problems. The color scheme was dated, the typography was trying too hard, and the whole thing felt like it was designed by engineers, not artists. I can see what you mean, she admitted. I'm offering you a 3-month contract position. Full salary, benefits, and you can work remotely most of the time. We'd need you in the office maybe twice a week for meetings. Claire's heart was racing. This was too good to be true. It had to be. Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. I could be terrible to work with. I could steal from you. I could be lying about all my credentials. David met her eyes steadily. Last night, Dr. Chen ran a background check on you. Standard procedure, just to make sure you didn't have any medical conditions we needed to know about. Your credentials are real. You graduated top of your class from design school. Your former boss at the marketing firm gave you a glowing reference when I called him this morning. You called my old boss? Claire didn't know whether to be angry or amazed. I did. He said letting you go was the hardest decision he'd ever made, purely financial. He said if his company ever got back on its feet, you'd be his first hire. Claire felt tears threatening again. She'd thought Greg had forgotten about her the moment she'd packed up her desk. This still feels like charity, she said quietly. It's not charity if you earn. David pulled out a contract from his desk drawer. This is a standard employment agreement. Same terms I'd offer anyone else. Actually, probably better than what I'd offer someone else because I'm desperate and you're perfect for this project. You can have a lawyer look it over if you want. I can't afford a lawyer. Then I'll pay for one. I want you to feel completely comfortable with this arrangement. Claire looked down at the contract, at the salary figure that would change everything. It was more than she'd made at her last job. Enough to get an apartment again, to eat regular meals, to stop living out of her car. There's one condition, David said, and this is non-negotiable. Here it comes, Claire thought. The real catch. You can't work effectively while living in your car, so for the duration of this contract, I have an apartment you can use. It's a property I own downtown, above a bookstore. 1 bedroom, fully furnished. The previous tenant just moved out. Consider it part of your compensation package. I can't accept that, Claire said immediately. Why not? Because it's too much. Because I don't take handouts. Because I need to stand on my own 2 feet. David stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. You know what I learned the hard way? Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the smartest thing you can do. He turned back to face her. When I was 22, I had an idea for a piece of software. Revolutionary stuff, or so I thought. But I was broke. Living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates eating ramen for every meal. I met an investor at a coffee shop by pure chance. He believed in my idea and offered to fund it. And you know what I almost did? I almost said no, because I was too proud. Too stubborn. I wanted to do everything myself. What changed your mind? Claire asked, despite herself. My roommate at the time. He asked me a simple question. Would I rather be proud or successful? Because sometimes you can't be both. Sometimes you have to let people help you so you can get to a place where you can help others. Claire looked down at the contract in her hands. Everything she needed was right here. A job, an apartment, a chance to rebuild her life. But accepting it felt like admitting defeat, like proving she couldn't survive on her own. I'll pay rent on the apartment, she said finally. Take it out of my salary. I'm not living there for free. David considered this. Okay, we'll deduct a reasonable rent. But you start next Monday, which means you need to move in this weekend. And we're providing the apartment furnished. No arguments. I have furniture. In storage. I couldn't afford the payments anymore, but it's still there. Then we'll get your furniture out of storage. I'll cover the back payments you owe. David, and you can pay me back. Add it to your rent payments. Whatever makes you feel better. But Claire, I need you to understand something. He stepped closer, his expression serious. I'm not doing this to control you or because I feel sorry for you. I'm doing this because my company needs your skills and you need a chance to use them. This is a business transaction that happens to benefit both of us. Claire wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe that this was real, that it wasn't going to disappear the moment she agreed. Can I think about it? She asked. Just for a day? Of course. Take the contract with you. My number is on the back. Call me when you've decided. Claire folded the contract and tucked it into her backpack. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Why did you really help me? She asked, not looking at him. The truth this time. There was a long silence. When David spoke, his voice was soft. Because this house is empty. Because I've spent 10 years building a company and making money. And I wake up every morning in a mansion with nobody to share it with. Because when I saw you on that bench, I saw myself at 19. And I remembered what it felt like to be invisible. And maybe, just maybe, because helping you helps me remember what it feels like to be human instead of just being rich. Claire turned to look at him. His face was open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I'll call you tomorrow, she said quietly. I'll be waiting. As Claire walked out of the mansion and toward her car, the contract felt like it was burning a hole in her backpack. She sat in the driver's seat of her old Honda and pulled it out, reading through it carefully. Everything was exactly as David had said. Fair terms, good salary, clear expectations. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone help us. You've got this. Claire leaned her head against the steering wheel and let out a long breath. For the first time in 3 weeks, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. She pulled out her phone and looked at David's number on the back of the contract. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Tomorrow, she'd told him. But maybe tomorrow was already here. She took a deep breath and started typing a text message. When do I start? 3 months had passed since Claire sent that text message, and her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The apartment above the bookstore had become her sanctuary. It was small but perfect, with large windows that let in the morning light and the constant, comforting smell of old books drifting up from below. She'd thrown herself into the rebrand project with everything she had. The first week had been terrifying. Walking into David's office building, meeting the team, sitting in on meetings where people discussed budgets that made her head spin. She'd felt like an imposter waiting for someone to point at her and say she didn't belong. But then she'd started creating. The designs poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She reimagined the entire visual identity of the app, creating something warm and inviting that spoke to struggling artists and freelancers. Something that said, we see you, we understand you, we're here to help. The team loved it. David loved it. And slowly, Claire had started to believe that maybe she actually deserved to be there. She'd also started paying off her debts. The storage unit fees, the rent from the apartment, small payments back to David for what she privately called her rescue expenses, even though he'd told her repeatedly that wasn't necessary. Every penny she paid back felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Her relationship with David had evolved into something unexpected. They'd fallen into an easy friendship, grabbing lunch together after meetings, talking about everything from design philosophy to their favorite movies. He'd shown her the vulnerability beneath his success, the loneliness that came with building an empire. And she'd shared her own struggles, the pain of being rejected by her family, the shame of those weeks living in her car. But lately, something had shifted. Claire couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there were moments when David's eyes lingered on her a little too long, or when his smile seemed to carry a weight beyond simple friendship. And if she was honest with herself, she felt it too. That flutter in her chest when he laughed at her jokes. The way her day felt brighter when she knew she'd see him. It scared her, because David Wellington wasn't just her friend. He was her boss, her landlord, the man who'd saved her life. The power imbalance was impossible to ignore, even when her heart wanted to. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything came to a head. Claire was in the office, putting the finishing touches on the app's launch campaign. The official release was scheduled for next week, and the energy in the building was electric. She was so focused on her work that she didn't hear David enter her small office until he knocked on the doorframe. "Got a minute?" he asked. Claire looked up and smiled. For you? Maybe two. He didn't return the smile. In fact, he looked troubled. He closed the door behind him and sat in the chair across from her desk. What's wrong? Claire asked, her stomach knotting with worry. I need to talk to you about something, and I don't really know how to say it. David ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd come to recognize. I did something, and I'm not sure if it was the right thing, but I did it anyway, and now you need to know about it. David, you're scaring me. He pulled out his phone and set it on her desk. 2 days ago, my security team does routine background monitoring on all employees. It's standard procedure, nothing invasive. But they flagged something concerning. Your mother. Claire felt her blood turn to ice. What about her? She was hospitalized last week. Pneumonia that developed into something more serious. She's stable now, but she was in the ICU for 3 days. How do you know this? Claire's voice came out as a whisper. The medical bills were filed with her insurance company, which triggered the flag in our system. Claire, I'm sorry, but I looked into it further. Her insurance denied most of the coverage. Some technicality about pre-existing conditions. The bills are substantial. Claire stood up, her chair rolling backward. Why are you telling me this? My mother made it very clear 2 years ago that I'm not her daughter anymore. She doesn't want anything to do with me. I know. I read the texts she sent you when you told her about design school. And Claire, I'm so sorry you went through that. But she's still your mother and she's in trouble. She's not my problem anymore, Claire said, but her voice cracked. David stood too, moving closer but not touching her. I paid the medical bills. All of them. I know I shouldn't have done it without asking you. But the hospital was threatening to send her to collections and I couldn't let that happen. Claire stared at him, her emotions warring inside her. Anger that he'd overstepped. Relief that her mother was okay. Shame that she'd needed David to fix yet another problem. Confusion about why any of this mattered to him. You had no right, she said quietly. I know. She doesn't deserve your kindness. She threw me away like garbage when I didn't fit into her perfect plan for my life. I know that too. Then why? Claire's voice rose. Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep fixing things, swooping in like some kind of savior? I can't keep owing you everything, David. I can't keep being your charity case. That's not what this is, David said firmly. Claire, you're not a charity case. You never were. Then what am I? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them had been willing to acknowledge until now. David took a step closer. You're the person who made me remember why I started this company in the first place. You're the reason I actually enjoy coming to work now instead of just going through the motions. You're the first person in years who sees me as David, not as a bank account or a business opportunity. Don't, Claire said, backing away. Don't do this. Don't do what? This, whatever this is. You're my boss, David. You own my apartment. You saved my life. The power dynamic here is impossible. Anything between us would be completely inappropriate. You're right, David said, but he didn't move away. It would be inappropriate. It would be complicated. It would probably be the worst business decision I've ever made. Then why are we having this conversation? Because I can't keep pretending I don't feel something. Because every time you walk into a room, it gets brighter. Because when you laugh at my terrible jokes, it makes my whole day worth it. Because I think about you constantly and it's driving me crazy. Claire felt tears streaming down her face. Stop, please stop. Why? Because I feel it too. The admission burst out of her. And I hate it. I hate that I feel this way about you because it makes everything messy and complicated and wrong. You saved me when I was at my lowest. How do I separate gratitude from whatever this feeling is? How do I know if what I feel is real or just some twisted version of dependence? David reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. Maybe you don't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe it's okay for things to be complicated. No, it's not okay, Claire said, stepping back from his touch. Because if this goes wrong, I lose everything. Not just you, but my job, my apartment, the life I've rebuilt. I can't risk that. I won't. The silence that followed was painful. David's expression shifted from hope to understanding to resignation. You're right, he said finally. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I needed you to know about your mother and then everything else just came spilling out. About my mother, Claire said, grabbing onto the safer topic like a lifeline. You can't keep doing things like that. Making decisions about my life without asking me. I know. I overstepped. It's just... David sat back down looking exhausted. When I found out, all I could think about was you getting a phone call that your mother had died, and you'd spend the rest of your life wondering if things could have been different. I couldn't let that happen. Claire sat down too, the anger draining out of her. She chose to cut me out of her life. She told me I was a disappointment, that I'd wasted my potential on silly dreams. Those were her exact words. Silly dreams? Parents make mistakes, David said quietly. Mine didn't get the chance to fix theirs because they died. But your mother is alive. Maybe she's realized how wrong she was, or maybe she hasn't. But at least you'll have the choice of whether to forgive her or not. I can't forgive her, Claire said, but even as she said it, she wasn't sure if it was true. Then don't. But maybe think about whether you want to at least talk to her, not for her sake, for yours. Claire put her head in her hands. Everything was suddenly too much. The feelings for David she'd been suppressing, the complicated situation with her mother, the fear that her new life was built on a foundation that could crumble at any moment. I need some time, she said, away from here, away from all of this. Of course, take whatever time you need. The project is basically done anyway. We can handle the launch without you if necessary. No, I'll be here for the launch. I just need the weekend to think. David stood to leave, then paused at the door. Claire, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For complicating things. For overstepping. For all of it, David? He turned back. Thank you. For my mother. I'm angry that you did it without asking, but I'm also grateful. Does that make sense? Yeah, he said with a sad smile. It makes perfect sense. After he left, Claire sat alone in her office for a long time. Finally, she pulled out her phone and stared at her mother's contact information. She hadn't deleted it even after 2 years of silence. Her finger hovered over the call button. Every instinct told her to walk away, to protect herself from more pain. But David's words echoed in her head. At least you'll have the choice. Before she could change her mind, she pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Claire was about to hang up when she heard a weak voice on the other end. Hello? Mom? Claire's voice broke. It's me. It's Claire. There was a long pause. Then she heard her mother start to cry. Oh, sweetheart. Oh, my sweet girl. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And just like that, 2 years of walls came crashing down. Claire cried as her mother apologized between sobs as they both released the pain they'd been carrying. The conversation lasted an hour, full of tears and confessions and careful steps toward forgiveness. When Claire finally hung up, she felt hollowed out but also lighter somehow. Her mother wanted to see her, to talk properly, to try to rebuild what she'd broken. It wouldn't be easy. Trust didn't repair itself overnight, but it was a start. Claire looked around her small office, at the designs covering her walls, at the life she'd built from nothing. 6 months ago, she'd been sleeping in her car, convinced she'd lost everything. Now she had a career, a home, friends, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to have a family again. But there was still one thing unresolved. One person she needed to talk to. She picked up her phone and sent David a text. Dinner tomorrow night? My treat. We need to talk about everything. His response came almost immediately. I'll be there. Claire leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring more complicated conversations, more difficult decisions. But tonight she let herself feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Gratitude. Not the uncomfortable gratitude of owing someone something, but the pure gratitude of being seen, being valued, being given a second chance at life. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it, not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who'd learned to save herself with a little help from someone who cared. And that made all the difference.